Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, and we are meeting once again with lecture 3 of Business English. So, I repeat once again that these first few lectures are basically based on your orientation of the course, where we are learning, trying to sink deep in the basics of communication skills and basics of business communication, particularly in English. So today's talk is going to be another a step forward in our understanding of basics of business communication. Today's talk, in the last lecture where we left was, we were doing our language expansion activity of giving advice, and so we are going to continue with that activity, and we will have a listening exercise, and then we will talk about communication, where we will talk the discernment versus dialogue situations. Then we will discuss forms of communication, formal versus informal. We will discuss a few things about nonverbal communication, communication in crisis, and defensive versus non-defensive communication. By discussing all the basics once, we'll be able to then build up our knowledge on the concepts to advance our understanding about the subject. So, Bismillah, once again, let's start with our today's talk. So we are going to continue with our language expansion activity. Last time I asked you to learn how to give advice, you would remember, and I gave you different questions to do, and I gave you different starters to add your own ideas according to the settings and the country and the part of country you live in. And I'm positive you must have done that. Now, since you have learned describing, you have learned giving advice, I want you to refresh your question-making skills, and that particularly in present tense. Because why? Whenever we are talking face-to-face and explaining or describing something, most of the time we are talking in present tense. Well, how can I do it? Can you please help me? Can you please explain this to me? What are we doing? We are talking in present tense because in present simple tense, we are talking about facts, procedures, instructions, routines, and habits. So whenever we are talking about these things, we are talking in simple present tense. Second thing, why the skill of designing questions? Well, whenever we are getting information or giving information, we are basically deals with questions. Getting information, we ask questions. Gaining information, we are replying questions, and in replying, answering questions, we may ask questions. Our answer can be another question. So question making skill is very important, and this is the skill where some students slip because they are not very much trained into using question markers. So let's see if you can make these basic questions. Let's do it together. In this activity here that you can see on the screen, I've given some answers, and I want you to make questions for them. So look at the very first question, very first answer. From a small village in southwest France called Marsac. What can be a question? Think. Where do you come from? A very simple question, but at times it's hard to come out of our mouth. Second answer, usually at 9 a.m. but sometimes at about 8:45. Well, time tells us that something is happening. About what time? AM says maybe it's morning. So what do you do during this time in the morning? make your guess, make question. Done? Here you are. What time do you usually start work at? This word at is used for the time on clock. I wake up at 7 o'clock, I do my breakfast at 7:30, I start my work at. So whenever you are specifying time, clock time, you need to use at. Whenever you are specifying the time on the day, you will use on, O-N, on. I don't work on Sundays. I have a holiday on Friday. Whenever you want to mention about some time of the day in a day, like in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, you use in. So these are the time preposition on, in, at. On is used for the day, in is used for the day of time of the day, and at is used time on the clock. For example, I start my work at 7:45 in the afternoon on Monday. You understand it? Okay. Now, look at third answer. Languages. English and French quite fluently, and also a bit of Chinese. Well, something is happening with languages. Maybe my understanding, proficiency. What do you think? Here you go. What languages can you speak? Look at next answer. In a small apartment near the center of town. Yeah, you're right. Where do you live? Look at next answer. Usually by bus. But if the weather is really good, I sometimes walk. Sometimes walk. Well, here you are. How do you come to work, or come to school, or come to office? Or how do you go to office? I usually go on holiday in June. When do you usually go on holiday? Look at the question markers that we are using. Where, what, how, when, and the second last is sometimes in the company canteen, but more often I go to the cafe around the corner. Where do you have your lunch? You get it? Okay, that was a refresher for question making. Now, that is today's lecture 3's activity that you are going to learn. Well, in the very first lecture, we learned how to talk about places where we are working or we plan to work. In the second activity, we talked about how to give advice. In the third, now we are going to learn how to talk about customs. What do we mean by customs? Well, write down these 3 words you need to really be clear about. Customs, traditions, and celebrations. Okay? So, whenever you are moving out of your town, moving out of your region, moving out of your province or country, these are the words that help you start small talk. What is small talk? That is we are going to discuss in the coming slides. But look at these pictures on screen. Look at the first picture where you can see a man and a bull. A man with something red in his hand. Do you think it's a custom? If it is, what it is, you're going to describe it, read about it, and describe it in your own words. What you are developing here is your descriptive skills. Look at the second picture. You can see a bride who is dressed in white gown, and she has a flower, a bouquet in her hand, and she's throwing it back. Now, which culture this belongs to? Is this a Muslim bride, or is this a visual of Christianity, or do you think it belongs to Hinduism? Well, after figuring out the culture, can you talk about the custom? Why is she throwing out flowers or the bouquet? Is she like, does she dislike it? But her gestures on her face show something different, and the way people are eager to catch it shows that probably it's a matter of pleasure. Find out, read about it, and try to explain it in your words. Look at the third picture. Two beautiful kids standing, one male and one female, a baba and a baby. Well, they have some pretty costumes on, but these costumes are a bit unusual. The boy pretends to be a pirate, maybe? Okay, having one eye closed, the bones and the skull sign on the hat, holding something Halloween. What is Halloween? Which culture it belongs to? What customs are performed? Read about it. See if it is applicable to your culture. You agree with it, you disagree, you like it, you dislike it. What are your reasons? Look at the fourth picture. Well, the dress shows the culture maybe. What do you think? Chinese? Japanese? Okay. Carrying fruits in hand. Is it a custom? Yes. Read about it and describe it. Look at the fourth picture. Well, it's a bit more ambiguous. Two people. What do you think? What are they sharing? Are they sharing a cup of coffee or green tea or black tea? Well, what is this kettle about? Does it show that this picture belongs to some particular culture? Well, you need to find out. Okay, so this is your task of today's lecture, to talk about customs, traditions, costumes, and describe the reasons behind them. The first picture is basically bullfighting in Spain. The second is a Christian bride throwing the bouquet behind, and that's a custom of leaving good wishes, well wishes for bridesmaid. What are the details I would want you to look into? The tradition in USA is of celebration of Halloween as a celebration. Why? For what? What do they do? Discuss. Chinese New Year. What do you mean by Chinese New Year? Do they have different year than us? If it is, what do we mean by that? Japanese tea ceremony. So, this is your homework. Now, after going through all these customs and festivals and information, and then the drill of describing this, you are going to do what? You are going to learn how to describe a local custom or festival in your hometown, and do these festivals and customs in any way affect the business activity in your hometown, or as a matter of fact in your cultural settings. Now, look at these sentences. Do you find them right in order? Maybe not. What we have to do, we have to find out, are they beginning or endings of a sentence? How will you do it? First, you have to reorganize this sentence, and then you have to find out whether this sentence is used in the beginning of a talk or in the ending of a talk. Now, I do one for you. The very first one is written as, "But sorry, have to go, I know." Maybe if I reorder the sentence, it would read like, "But sorry, I have to go now. But sorry, I have to go now. But sorry, I have to go now." Now, find out if I'm saying this, is it beginning of a talk, middle of a talk, or end of a talk? Maybe it's end of a talk. I have given my reason first, and in the end I say, I would have done that for you, but sorry, I have to go now. So this is how you are going to deal with all the sentences. You will reorder them, reorganize them, and will find out whether they are used in the beginning or in the ending. The first one is done for you. Sorry, but I have to go now. The second one, it's been nice meeting you. Third one, I can't believe how busy it is. Fourth one, did you have a good journey here? How was your weekend? Enjoy the rest of the conference. Nice talking to you. It's lovely weather today. So, all the B's written on the post are telling that these are the sentences to begin a talk, and rest of them are basically endings. So, once you are ready, once you are done with this, I would want you to think about what are the small talks that you can make in these situations. If you really want to improve on your language, you have to learn how to make small talks when you are traveling together on bus, on plane, on train, and somebody sitting next to you. How can you start your talk? Because you are going to be a business person who has to activate public relationing. If you are on the airport waiting for your flight and flight gets cancelled, how do you initiate talk with the customer support officer? Or if you are in a hotel staying outside your country or city and you meet somebody over there, so to pass on time and find out about things around, how can you start small talk? Or if you are on a business trip to somewhere, you're meeting new people, how will you introduce yourself? Or if you are attending a formal lunch or dinner and you meet new people there along with eating, how can you start and initiate talk? This is called making small talks to start public relationing. In our previous talk, we talked about formal and informal language, formal and informal messages. In today's talk, I want to go little more into the discussion, and I want to present a few sentences to you, statements to you, for you to find out whether they are formal or informal, and what makes us identify whether a message is formal or informal. Look at the sentences and please try to identify. Thank you for your email received yesterday. Where do you think? It's formal or informal? Well, yes, it's formal. Can you give me a copy of the bill? Look at this. I would be grateful if you could send me your catalog. All the best. Can you please bring Lars to translate? Would it be possible for you to organize my accommodation? I look forward to meeting you in person. See you at the meeting. Can you book the same hotel as last time? With best regards. Please accept my apologies for this misunderstanding. Thanks for your message earlier. I'm sorry, but I can't see you this week. Could you possibly arrange an interpreter? So, here you are with your answers. All the formal and all the informal in 2 different columns. You can match your answers with this. Now get ready, you are going to have your listening exercise of the day. You are going to listen to an audio. However, before that you listen to this podcast, the audio regarding Michael, you are going to read these questions that for that you'll need to find the answers. So, the very first answer that you need to find for: how long did Michael live and work in China? Where is Michael from? Did he live a positive or negative experience of living and working in China? And then complete. The second question is of completing these statements, either false or true. You can see them here. Then you have to check the differences between China and the West that Michael mentions, and you have to answer the following questions. What does Michael say is like being a child again? And all these 4 questions. Let's do it together, and you need to find answer to these questions. You can note down the answers. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, now I play the audio, and you can keep on focusing on the screen to look at the answers and questions and find answers for them.
I decided to go to China because I thought it would be a very interesting place, very different to where I live or where I had lived. You know, the way of life out there would be completely different to what I'm used to. I thought it would really challenge myself as well. I taught when I lived in China. I taught at a university. The students I was working with wanted to come and study in the UK, and I prepared them for their studies in England. To be a teacher in China, you have to, first of all, have a degree, which is a requirement of your visa. But it's also useful to have what they call a CELTA qualification, which is a 4-week intensive teaching qualification, which runs you through the basics of how to teach. I lived there for about 3.5 years. And in that time, I lived and worked in 3 different parts of China. The jobs that I had were in different parts of the country. So I basically just went where an attractive job was. I think perhaps the biggest challenge of going to China was not being able to read or write any script. It was like being a child again, because you couldn't read street signs, you couldn't read menus in restaurants, you couldn't read signs on shops. So quite a lot of the time you didn't know what buildings were without going into them and kind of looking around. But over time you learn the basics, and there's an obvious system to the characters, and once you've learnt that, it's possible to learn to read. And obviously that's kind of the biggest challenge. But aside from that, but linked to it as well, there are all kinds of communication issues, not only with language, but with the whole issue of face in Chinese culture. And the Chinese will go to great lengths to avoid having to say no, where if you've asked them to do something and they can't, they'll always find an excuse why they can't do it, instead of telling you no straight away. Doing business in China is, I think, a very complicated thing as an outsider. There's obviously the whole issue of face and that kind of thing, but a lot of weight is placed on personal relations, and there's a whole tradition of gift giving. And when you're doing business with someone in China, it is the customary thing to take them a gift, even upon first meeting. Typical things would be an expensive bottle of cognac or brandy or something, or if it's male to male business dealings, cigarettes would always be a gift that's given. But also, I think as a Westerner in China, the Chinese are always very grateful, very impressed if you make an effort to at least learn some of their language, or if you take the time to pick up some of their customs and habits, then they will be very appreciative and they'll be very impressed. The Chinese always thought it was very, very unusual how much we in the West say please and thank you all the time. Interestingly, there is a word in Chinese for please, but in the 3.5 years I was there, I don't think I ever heard anyone say it. Not because they're rude, but it's just not in their culture to say it. In the UK, we say thank you when in a restaurant, when the waitress brings us the menu, when she asks us what we want, when she brings us the cutlery. And in China, I found myself doing that because that just came naturally to me. But if I was ever out with Chinese friends, they would always think it was very, very unusual. It's also not the done thing to leave tips in restaurants. The waiters and waitresses, they don't understand, or they didn't understand if we left some money on the table. They didn't know what it was for, and so that's something to avoid. Yeah, eating out was always quite an experience.
Okay, here we go. So, could you get answers for your drill? Your questions? Let me tell you the answers so you can check them with yours and see if you get the right answers. So the first question was, how long did Michael live and work in China? So it was 3.5 years. Second, where is Michael from? Well, he's from the UK, England. Did he have a positive or negative experience of living and working in China? Positive experience. Now, you have to decide whether these statements are true or false. Michael taught secondary school students in China. False. He taught university students. Michael needed 2 qualifications to teach in China. True. A degree and CELTA certificate in English language teaching to adults. Michael worked in 4 different areas of China. That's false. He worked in 3 areas. Now you have to check on all the differences between China and West that Michael mentions. Well, difference of language, saying no, please and thank you, and tipping in restaurants are the differences that he marks. Now, what does Michael say is like being a child again? Well, asking students to, he says that learning to read and write a language, not understanding how to read and write. And what would Michael do if he didn't know what a sign on a shop was? He would go into the building and have a look around. What is it polite to do when meeting a business person for the first time? Well. Give a gift that is, brandy or cigarette or something like that. Now, how did waiters and waitresses react when Michael left a tip? They would not understand. They did not know what the money was for. And that was it for your listening drill of the day. Now, let's move into our subject-specific matter discussion. However, before you move on to your discussion based on the subject matter, I would want you to look at the screen, and there you can see a few words written, highlighted in color. These are the words that are being used in the audio, and if by chance you're not aware of these words, the meanings of these words in simple English are written in front. So if you would want to know these meanings first and then listen to the audio again, you can do that. This will help you improve your knowledge, vocabulary, and as a matter of fact, language. We are going to talk about the communication, 2 types of communication, discernment and dialogue. Well, what is this discernment? Listening in which a leader detects a champion of communication. A trained individual detects an unarticulated message hidden below the surface of spoken interaction. And a dialogue is an active sharing and listening in which people explore common ground and grow to understand each other and share a worldview. So, would you get what a discernment is, where you are trying to find out what is hidden in the information? So, dialogue and discussions, what are the differences? Look at the screen. Lack of understanding, disagreement, divergent points of views, evaluate others. These make us help having a dialogue and discussion. When we are having a dialogue, we reveal feelings, we explore assumptions, we suspend convictions, and we build common ground. And the results are that we can have long-term innovative solutions, unified group, shared meaning with mutual understanding, and transformed mindsets. However, when we are discussing, we state positions, we advocate convictions, we convince others, or we try to convince others, we build oppositions. And the likely results are, we can have short-term resolution, agreement by logic. However, if you lack logic, you cannot have agreement. Oppositions beaten down, so a sense of this win and lose situation is created, and mindsets held on to. You do not change mindsets. Alright, so what would a communication leader do? He would establish credibility, would prefer dialogue than on discussion, would build goals on common grounds with mutual understandings, would make your position compelling to others, and connect emotionally to change mindsets instead of aggravating negative ideas. And how do you deal with communication apprehensions, reluctance, an individual's level of fear or anxiety associated with either real or anticipated communication with another person or persons? Well, now we need to know about the forms of communication. There are different forms of communication, fastest and slowest. So the basic difference is of speed. And you can look at the screen. This is, the arrow shows you that the fourth row that is blue in color, and then getting green and orange and brown, are basically showing you a travel of speed from slower to fastest communication. So let's start from the web, that is the person-to-person communication, phone communication, instant messaging, then email, then small messages, newspaper, magazines, websites, books, audios and videos. All these are different forms of communication. Some are personal, some are electronically assisted. Some are fast, some are slow. That depends on the carrier and medium that we are using. Now, considering different forms of communication, I will again take you to the discussion of formal versus informal communication. In the beginning of the talk, you had an activity related to identifying what are the formal statements and what are the informal statements. Now, who do we do this formal type of communication with? What is this? What is the difference between formal and informal if you want to pick one? Well, you need to understand who is your audience, because the problem is to decide whether we are going to take formal approach of communication or informal. Who will make the decision? How will I make the decision? Well, you need to talk about who, what, when, and where. If you're clear about 4 W's of this approach, your decision is clear. Okay, so who is the source? An audience. Who is your audience? What are the contents, the subject matter, the text, the message that is to be communicated? When is the delivery? What is the data type that is to be delivered? Where? What is the impact factor you're expecting, the context, or all the additional information? When you are clear about all these things, the decision is made automatically. Well, channel richness, the richness of carrier that you choose for your message to be communicated. Look at the flow chart on the screen. You can look at the difference between formal report, face-to-face verbal discussion, electronic and email or web-assisted discussions. Whether you're writing memo, you are doing conveying a message, or telephone discussions. Disadvantages and advantages. Look at the highs and lows of channel richnesses. Disadvantages are that the information will be, the formal report will be, if you're using, email something, they are going to be impersonal, one-way and slow feedback. However, face-to-face is going to be personal, two-way and fast feedback. Then you have, if you're doing telephonic conversation, it provides record, premeditated, it's easy, and disseminated. However, disadvantages are that no record, spontaneous, dissemination, and hard. Verbal and non-verbal, they both have their advantages and disadvantages. So you have to look for what outcomes are desired. If keeping a record is a desired outcome, then you better go for black and white communication, whether you're writing a memo or an email, because that way you can keep a record. However, if you're looking for fast feedback, maybe a personal one-to-one talk is better than writing an email. So look at the outcomes that help you decide what medium, what carrier you need to pick up for your communication. So this leads us to get into the effective use of electronic communication channels. Well, it is not to ignore that electronic channels help us combine high tech with high touch. Consider the circumstances before you make a decision. Read twice before you hit the send button. Know what is off limits, because technology has its limitations. Now, however, leaders are always watched, whether they are making formal communications or informal communications, verbal or non-verbal. They are watched for their appearance, they are watched for their behavior, they are watched for their action, they are watched for their attitude. So, selection of a communication type is always a very sensitive decision to make. And you have to, if you are in management, you need to know when you are walking around, even considering that you are doing it informally, can be considered formal. So you always maintain a persona, a business persona that you adopt or adapt, and then you maintain it for your business persona. Well, this takes us to normal verbal communication. Non-verbal behaviors are very important. Well, so far we in all three lectures, starting from the very first lecture, we have been talking about verbal behaviors. Now we have to talk about non-verbal behaviors as well, because they play a very important role. You look at these hand sketches on the screen, maybe one or two strokes combined together, and they communicate feelings, a complete message. Look at hands up, look at hands down, head down, look at the go, look at the head holding posture, look at the fun posture. So any gesture that you are making, you may make it out of habit or it's an unconscious gesture, but it communicates a message. So you have to be very sensitive while using non-verbal behaviors being in business, especially eye contact, facial expressions, gestures, posture and body orientation, proximity, vocal other than words. Now let's talk about them one by one. So while keeping an eye contact, you need to be careful whether it's an eye contact, it's a gaze, you are staring at somebody, it's a continuous gaze, you are shifting your eye contact. So whatever action you do, it needs to have a purpose behind, and then your action serves your purpose. Same is the case with facial expression, your gestures, your posture, your body orientation, the proximity, how close you should physically be with some objects, a phenomenon, or some other person. What outcomes do you want? And vocal. There are a few questions I'm posing. I want you to answer them. Let me see how, what are your instinct, what is your instinct, and what is your understanding about these things. When conversing with others, I usually do most of the talking. What do you think? When conversing with others, I usually let the other person do most of the talking. Or when conversing, I try to equalize my participation in the conversation. What will you go for? That's a kind of business communication persona quiz. Well, the preferable is C. Look at this. The preference is A. Look at the third question. The preference is C. Look at the question 4. The preference is B. Look at the fifth question. The preference is to A, because you cannot entirely ignore it. So, however, if you're picking up the wrong option, you are into a crisis. So what do you do when you land into a crisis? How do you communicate? There are few things that you need to keep in mind. Stay calm, listen harder, be visible, tell the truth, communicate the vision for the future. You're not communicating for now, you're communicating for always. So keep this in your mind, you'll be over, you'll be through. So now we are moving up to summing up our talk that we did so far regarding the basics of communication. So slowly and gradually I am taking you to wrap up. So benefits of good communication are quicker problem solving, better decision making, steady workflow, strong business relations, and better professional image. So, communication is the evoking of a shared or common meaning in another person. Interpersonal communication is between two or more people in an organization. And communicator is the person organizing the message, and receiver is the person receiving a message. Perceptual screen is basically a window through which we interact with people that influences the quality, accuracy, and clarity of the communication. These are the few examples in definitions you should be very clear about. So what we can conclude is the message are the thoughts and feelings that the communicator is attempting to elicit in the receiver. Feedback loop is the pathway that completes two-way communication, and language is a code, the words, their pronunciation, and the methods of combining them used and understood by a group of people makes a lot of difference to message and the process of communication. Data is uninterrupted and unanalyzed facts. Information, data that have been interpreted, analyzed, and have meaning to some user. Richness, the ability of a medium or channel to elicit or evoke meaning in the receiver's head. So, you can see the basic interpersonal communication skills model is basically perceptual screen and perceptual screens. Can you see that? Message, context, and effect. When you are in different context, the effect is going to be different. So that depends on the event, the situation you are in, and that will change the perceptual screen. And this influences message quality, accuracy, clarity, include age, gender, values, beliefs, moods, culture, feelings, emotions, experiences, and needs. All these affect designing, framing your perceptual screen that helps you interpret and understand one message. We talked about one-way communication and we talked about two-way communication. I sum this up. One-way communication is a person sends a message to another person and no questions, feedback, or interaction follow. Good for giving simple directions, and it is fast but often less accurate than two-way communication. However, two-way communication is the communicator and receiver interact, and it's good for problem solving. Now, we are going to move into the written communication, and our next lecture is going to be entirely about our written communication. However, what we need to consider to prepare our understanding for the upcoming issue is that what are the keys to effective writing communication? We will talk about expressive writing, emphatic listening and addressing, persuasive leadership, sensitivity to feelings, and informative management. However, why do I point these things right now in lecture 3, where we are not talking about writing communication, is that they are not only the aspects to be considered when writing to communicate. They are they are to understand and include in any type of communication that you are initiating. You have to be expressive, you have to be emphatic listener, you have to be persuasive in your relationship, you have to be sensitive to people's feeling and emotion, as well as you have to be informative manager. We talked about several types of barriers and limitations to communication. Let's quickly sum them up. Factors that block or significantly distort successful communication. It can be physical separation, it can be status difference, it can be gender difference, it can be cultural diversity, and it can be language. We have talked about all these phenomena. So, this causes us to have a failure of communication. Now, in dealing with the crisis of communication or failure of communication, we at times deal it in two ways. Either we make defensive communication or we make non-defensive communication. What do I mean by that? Well, defensive communication is communication that can be aggressive, attacking, and angry, or passive and withdrawing. That leads to injured feelings, communication breakdowns, alienation, retaliatory behaviors, non-productive efforts, and problem-solving failures. However, the non-defensive communication is communication that is assertive, direct, and powerful. It provides basis for defense when attacked, restores order, balance, and effectiveness, and the patterns that can be there to understand. So, what can be two defense patterns of defensive communication? You have two models on the screen. Subordinate defensiveness. How do subordinate create a defensive pattern? Characterized by passive, submissive, withdrawing behavior, indifferent attitude. Dominative defensiveness, characterized by active, aggressive, and attacking behavior, boss versus employee, and employer versus employee, and the earlier one was employee versus employer. Well, let's talk about defensive attitudes. It's a power play. Boss, finish this report by months and or lose your promotion. Put down, boss. A capable manager would already be done with this report. Putting your employee down. Labeling, boss. You must be a slow learner. Your report is still not done. Raising doubts, boss. How can I trust you? Christ, if you can't finish an easy report. All these are defensive attitudes. Misleading information. Employee would say, Morgan has not gone over with me the information I need for the report. Morgan left Christ with a copy of the report. Well, scapegoating. Employee, Morgan did not give me input until just today. You are scapegoating. Hostile jokes. Employee says, you can be serious. The report isn't that important. How do you know that it's not important? Deception. Deceiving your employer. I gave it to the secretary. Did she lose it? Ah, so you are a deception. Alright, so once again looking at the powerful tools, writer observed as centered, assertive, controlled, informative, realistic, and honest. Or the communicator. Communicator exhibits self-control, self-possession, and reader feels accepted rather than rejected. So, we have Catherine Carrier's rule to non-defensive communication, that is, define the situation, clarify the person's position, acknowledge the person's feeling, and bring the focus back to the fact. That was all for today's talk. That was lecture 3 of Business Communication, Business English, where we continued with our language expansion activity. We moved on with our listening exercise, talked about communication, discernment versus dialogue, forms of communication, norms of nonverbal communication, in situations of crisis and defensive attitudes and behaviors, and how to use power tools to fight that. This was all for today's talk. I'll see you in the next lecture, inshallah. By then, Allah Hafiz.